Chapter 30. Returning to an Old Love. That same January that Paulie was having a heart-to-heart talk with Frank Stallone, I knew it was time that I ventured out and did more things on my own. I had already begun work on my animated project Victor, and now I wanted to take a stab and revisit something that I missed and still loved: wrestling. No, I wasn't going to try to become a professional wrestler, but I decided to try and capitalize on the success of the Joey-licious character that I had created many, many years ago and that got some great response in the Z-Rock episode. I wrote up a small story synopsis and created a fun backstory for the Joey-licious character that was based heavily on my real life. I figured, based on real life worked for Z-Rock, maybe it'll work for Joey-licious. After writing the basic story for the pilot episode of Joey-licious, I knew I needed to spice it up a little. I remembered that a friend of mine from grammar school, Chris Lynn, was a really talented scriptwriter, and I decided to give him a call. Chris and I actually have the exact same birth date, January 21st, 1974. I decided to call him and grab a few drinks and talk about the new project I was developing. That night was a big snowstorm, and we talked for a couple of hours about Joey-licious. Chris seemed really into it and familiar with the episode of Z-Rock in which Joey-licious appeared. I enlisted Chris to take my 2-page story synopsis and come up with the full pilot episode script. What I really wanted from Chris was to somehow capture our youth in the pages of Joey-licious. Yes, Joey-licious was going to be mostly about wrestling, but more importantly, it was going to be about Joey-licious, how he grew up, and the struggles of trying to make his dream of becoming the greatest professional wrestler of all time a reality. The main characters of the show would be, of course, Joey-licious, his lifelong buddy, Scally, and his mom, Mrs. C. A few days later, Chris emailed me the first draft of the pilot episode. I couldn't believe how fast he wrote it. I was very excited to read it and hoped for the best. Midway through, I really started to feel like I was back in my childhood. Chris really had a way of capturing the dialogue of our youth. It was perfect. He also retitled the show Wrestling with Joey-licious to capitalize on the kind of double entendre. One way of looking at it meant that it was a show about wrestling and about the title character, Joey-licious. Another way, and really the way I always think of it, was me constantly wrestling with my alter ego, Joey-licious. The next step would be to approach my old Z-Rock producers to see if they had any interest in Wrestling with Joey-licious. As soon as I emailed Mark Effman the idea, he sounded interested. He also knew that the Joey-licious character was a hit for Z-Rock and thought we could capitalize on it. He wanted Chris and I to come up to the Mark office as soon as possible to discuss. Mark eventually agreed to produce a short sizzle reel for Joey-licious, much like they had done for Z-Rock. The only problem was that they wanted it to be almost a quasi-reality show and to actually follow me trying to become a wrestler. Unfortunately, the TV landscape at this time was all reality TV. It was what everyone wanted. It was cheap, fast, and easy to make. That's not at all what I was looking to do. I wanted Wrestling with Joey-licious to be fully scripted with some room for improv. This caused a little bit of a rift when it came time to film the sizzle, and it didn't turn out as well as I expected. I eventually pulled Joey-licious away from the Marks so Chris and I could do it our way. All the while I was working on Wrestling with Joey-licious, ZO2 was still trucking ahead, playing as many shows as possible. I was becoming more and more difficult to work with because I felt like we were back to playing dozens of useless shows, just so it would appear that we were busy. This was always Paulie's MO. One of the final straws for me came when Paulie decided he wanted to break ties with our concert booking agent that we recently signed with, the Agency Group. I was completely against this. The Agency Group was one of the biggest booking agents in the country, and we had been trying to get them to sign us for years. They were our only hope of getting a big tour and the big marquee shows that I thought we should be doing. Paulie thought the exact opposite. In his mind, if we weren't playing constantly, we weren't working hard enough. He wanted to play every little place that would book us, and for next to no money. Paulie always had a tendency of working hard, not necessarily smart. The agency group didn't want ZO2 to play a lot of these places because it essentially hindered some of the bookings they were getting for us. So once again, and for the final time, I was outvoted. Dave went along with Paulie, and we left one of the biggest agents in the country so we could play little dive bars. Insane. After this, I decided I wasn't going to play as many shows with ZO2 anymore. At this time, Paulie also decided he wanted to change the image of the band, and he didn't mean just physically, but musically. He also wanted a shift in the overall attitude, thinking we should be a more serious band with meaningful messages in our songs. No more goofy attitudes or funny stuff. Again, we were on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. I couldn't disagree more. If anything, I thought we should go the exact other direction. We were now known mostly for Z-Rock. Everyone loved us in the show. We were funny, goofy, and never took ourselves too seriously, which was exactly how we were in real life. I thought at that time, Paulie was starting to go through an early midlife crisis. And I think I was correct. Paulie had gotten married the day after Angelina was born and got divorced shortly after. This absolutely crushed Paulie. Getting divorced, on top of the whole disaster with Bob and Lynn, losing our record label, and Z-Rock's cancellation sent Paulie over the deep end. Paulie even admitted one night on the road that the main reason he wanted to do so many away shows was because he had nothing to go home to. We had just become such different people at this point in our lives that right then and there, I knew it wasn't going to work anymore. But I really knew Paulie would never be the same again after we got an offer from our old agent Brian Stern at William Morris to do an original internet streaming show on Warner Brothers' new channel. Brian told us that Warner Brothers wanted ZO2 Z Brothers to do a comedy show on their new streaming network. It would have put us back in the public eye and possibly even on Warner Brothers' record label, since the channel was going to strictly highlight Warner artists. The show would have been very much like Z-Rock, but focus even more on the kids' music. It would be a zany, fun comedy show. Shockingly, Paulie wanted nothing to do with it. Even Dave, who was always on Paulie's side, tried to convince him to do the show, but Paulie outright refused. He wanted to distance himself from goofy Afro-haired Paulie from Z-Rock as much as he could. He had recently cut his hair very short and essentially cut all ties to that old version of himself. After this, I had basically checked out of ZO2 land, and Paulie and Dave knew it. After another few shows, Paulie called a meeting to tell me and Dave, because we all wanted such different things now, ZO2 should go on a permanent hiatus. I agreed. We discussed in great detail that we would finish the new album that was almost written and release it as a way to end the final chapter of ZO2. We would tell all of our fans that we were taking a long hiatus, but they might eventually see us again. We all agreed there was no reason we should say we were breaking up or have a farewell show. We had a lot of endorsements, and there was no reason to jeopardize that by saying ZO2 was breaking up. During this time, Paulie had changed the old Rock Asylum brand into a charity organization. He consumed himself in it. I believed it was just something for Paulie to bury himself in while he was going through a very hard time. I thought it was actually a great thing for him to focus on. ZO2 had a show upcoming at Webster Hall in New York City, but Paulie was billing it under the Rock Asylum umbrella. One day on social media, I saw the Rock Asylum show being advertised as ZO2's final performance. I was furious. It wasn't so much that it was being billed as such, but the fact that ZO2 had a very specific discussion as a band a few days prior to do the exact opposite thing. To this day, I feel Paulie did it for his own selfish reasons. He wanted to sell more tickets to his Rock Asylum event by using the ZO2 Final Performance card. I had dozens of people calling me to ask, what happened? Why is ZO2 breaking up? I didn't know what they were even talking about until I saw the social media post. This caused a big rift between Paulie and I. I hated to be disrespected, and I felt this was a slap in my face. We didn't talk for quite some time. We even had one more show after Rock Asylum, down in Maryland, that I decided I wouldn't play. ZO2 got a replacement drummer for the very last show. It's exactly the opposite way that I wanted ZO2 to end. I wanted everything we did to be celebrated. I wanted to release our last album, which I thought would have been amazing, by the way. Here's one of the songs that was going to be on the new ZO2 album. It's called Live Today.
We all have regrets, goals we haven't met, dues we need to pay. And the clock is ticking faster. Gotta figure out what we're after and try and find a way. Find a way. If we die tomorrow, would you say you borrowed all the years you wasted? Did you get it right? Time keeps moving, there's no second chances, so live today, live today. Too headstrong for changing. We spend our whole lives waiting for the weight of the world to come around. We've been chasing the six-figure dragon, but the things we want to do, we haven't. 'Cause our feet are glued to the ground. To the ground. If we die tomorrow, would you say you borrowed all the years you wasted? Did you get it right? Time keeps moving, there's no second chances, so live today, 'cause once you leave the stage, take the minutes that you saved and throw them all away. If we die tomorrow, would you say you borrowed all the years you wasted now? If we die tomorrow, would you say you borrowed all the years you wasted? Did you get it right? Time keeps moving, there's no second chances, so live today, live today,
If after that we decided to do a farewell show or shows, we would do it the right way. Instead, because Paulie felt the need to do what he did on his own, Without even discussing it with Dave and I, we ended on a complete down. ZO2 was no more. While writing this book, my bandmate, my friend, no, my little brother, Dave Z, passed away in a terrible car accident while on tour with one of his new bands, Adrenaline Mob. The band's RV had pulled off to the shoulder on the side of the highway somewhere in Florida to fix a flat tire when an 18-wheel semi-truck plowed into them, causing Dave to lose his life. Dave was one of those people who just always had a good time. He lived his life his way as a big, goofy kid. He never had a care in the world, and that goes for money, health, or what he was going to be doing in 5 years. He just enjoyed himself in the moment and never cared about making a fool of himself as long as it made someone else laugh. After ZO2 ended, I would always ask Dave about what he was planning to do next, what his goals were, his ambitions, whether he was going to buy a house, start a family. He always answered the same way. I'm perfectly happy the way I am, and with what I'm doing. Why would I buy a house and have to worry about it? I love my little apartment. I love my life exactly the way it is. And he really did. His fiancée, Selena, posted a perfect picture and caption of Dave after he passed. May something in this world make you as happy as a jelly donut made Dave. That was Dave, the happiest man in the world, just eating a stupid jelly donut. That's why it was so crushing when he died. I was most sad for him because the life that he loved so much was taken away in an instant. I'm so angry, sad, and heartbroken and confused about why God would take his life away. Why? It made no sense. I always assumed that ZO2 would reunite one day and conquer the world. The next ZO2 album would have been fantastic, filled with hits and the raw energy that everyone expected from us. I even thought that Z-Rock would eventually make its triumphant return. The cult following that it had would surely demand that it resurface in some fashion. Maybe even a Z-Rock movie filled with wacky guest stars galore. All I knew was that someday, Paulie, Dave, and Joey would be back bigger than ever. We had so much more to do together. I would give anything to be on one more silly road trip with those two idiots, arguing for hours over what we were going to have for lunch or debating who could eat the most chicken nuggets. Here's one of the final songs Dave was working on. It's a song called Complicated. It's absolutely one of my favorite songs Dave ever wrote.
Sitting alone, still waiting for your phone call. Looking around at memories that remind me of you. I can't seem to get out of my head. Why can't it be easier to love you? Why does it feel like what we have is slipping away? Are you just waiting for a miracle? 'Cause if we don't start now, where else can we go? We must try somehow to pull us from this love. Don't ask, 'cause it's complicated. Our lives together is so
On March 17th, 2017, ZO2 did unite one final time at Arlene's Grocery to celebrate Paulie's 40th birthday. It was so great to be on stage with those two knuckleheads again and to celebrate all that we accomplished. I am forever thankful that we had that one last night together. It would be the last time I saw Dave. For 10 years of my life, I spent more time with Dave and Paulie than I did my own family. And in the process, they became family. A weird Jewish Z version of family, but family all the same. They were both like my little brothers who I loved to pick on. Over those 10 years, I've never argued, debated, laughed, and eaten so much in my life. I will forever cherish each and every moment we spent on stage and in front of the camera together. But more so, all of the moments just kidding around and enjoying life. Rest in peace, Dave. I'll miss you every day.